I missed that. And then take across the area. Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah. Okay, I thought you did that on the other side.
It's a profit.
Yeah.
If they need to buy something new.
Yeah. There's like, they have like probably $4,000. Someone has to take out a loan.
Okay, I think I'd like to call the meeting to order. We're missing one person, but he'll be able to join us in all.
I didn't see his hand there.
So we have a really interesting agenda. We've got two big items. Developing a work plan at the end of the meeting, and hearing a really interesting proposal at the beginning of the meeting. And then a couple of other things in the middle. Any changes to the agenda?
So Colin Johnson
Yeah.
brought these 3 documents. They
Yeah.
will be added to 4.1. I have them beside you. And then Bonnie has an item
That's what sort of these 7.2. It's a discussion about how to spend our rebate from care reporting. We have $4,000 to allot to or to recommend.
Didn't we already deal with that?
Did we come up with something?
Yeah, I thought we were, well, we'll deal with that rather than talking about it now with our guests. Since we dealt with that on the plug-in issue. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve? Maureen? Okay. All those in favor? Carried. Seconded by Mark. And the minutes, we have minutes of our last meeting. Any errors or omissions? No. Can I have a motion? Maureen again. Okay, Denise seconded it. And those in favor? Motion carried. All right, so let's get right to it then, please, with our delegation. So Louise and Colin, this has become really interesting. I scanned your material quickly, but I'd love to hear all about it. So how do you want to proceed? It looks like we've got a nice picture to start with.
Well,
Tell us what you want to do.
I think the first thing to do is to kind of introduce ourselves.
Sure.
We are Louise and Colin show.
Okay.
I'm Louise McIntosh, and I, with my husband Dave McIntosh, have been lucky enough to be the island contractor for our solid waste and recycling products since, I looked back, 1994.
Wow.
I know. I think I had dark hair when I started. And so what that actually does here is allow me a little bit of history to how the island has grown as far as its population, but also the way that it has dealt with its solid waste. And then ultimately, over time, food waste, yard waste, recycling, and just about everything else that we get thrown at. So we've seen a lot of changes. We've seen a lot of policy changes that then changed the way that we had to do things. Not just on the ground, but also with air quality. So starting off back, I think it was in 1998, I pulled up some figures, and that was the first year that Bowen Island actually did a pilot project on keeping yard waste out of our garbage. And at that time, food waste was not a big issue. It was more of a yard waste issue, and it was more about backyard burning. And at the time, we had extensive burning on the island of lot clearing and backyard clearing and yard trimmings, which for a long time didn't cause too much of a problem, but as the population increased, there was more problems with air quality, and then it was recognized in the our corridor here in Howe Sound that collectively all of the communities were having issues with their air quality and how we were going about backyard burning. So that was our first pilot project in '98. It was just done over 2 months, so it wasn't a very big collective period for information, because in 1999 we implemented yard waste pickup. And that year we picked up it was 4 ton in the 2 months that we did the pilot, and the next year we picked up 17 ton. So people were quite happy not to be burning in their backyards. And at the time, you know, the easiest thing for us to do was to take it into North Vancouver, because that's what everybody else was doing. And part of our contract took that into consideration. By the year 2000, we were collecting over 40 ton. And so that was the very first year that everybody said, well, maybe you should just leave it here. Right, so we did a little bit of composting in around the recycling depot just to see how it would work on ground, and then we actually asked a number of householders who had bigger properties who were interested in having fill that was just yard. Once again, it was just yard waste. We weren't dealing with the food waste. So those were back in the early 2000s. Needless to say, in 2012, it became imminent for the whole Lower Mainland to identify that our food waste now, by law, should be restricted from the garbage, and that we use it as a resource or deal with it differently than landfill, because a lot of the food waste was still going into landfill at that time. So we had a huge transition in 2012. We were pretty good at it on Bowen Island by then, because we had been source separating, and by then we just asked people to put their food waste in with their yard waste, and it wasn't a very big learning curve for them. So in 2012, we actually collected 262 ton. So we were up and running fairly fast compared to other communities. Now, I would say that we've been very successful, and you know, we've gone back in those days. We were still collecting over 400 ton of garbage, along with our 260 ton of food waste, yard waste. So to put it into perspective, last year we collected only 300 ton of garbage, but we had collected 560 ton of food waste and yard waste. So what has happened is we've created a very successful collection system, and over the last 5 to 6 years, there's been quite an interest and a push, and you might be well aware that there's been a number of studies with the help of the Knick Knack Nook, you know, helping fund some studies for us to look at keeping everything on the island here, because if we were to just think about it, the easiest thing would be for us to keep it here, of course, right?
Hi.
Sorry, Louise. Hi, Alastair, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much.
So Alastair, we're just doing introductions. If you can just hang on, and I'll introduce you in a bit.
Absolutely, thank you.
Hi, Alastair. I'm just giving everybody a little bit of a rundown. I'm Louise, the local contractor. So I get the job of collecting all this great stuff.
Yeah.
So basically, what we've been looking at over the last 5-7 years, there's been a real interest and push for us to deal with our food waste, yard waste, which is ever increasing, in a way that is more local and hopefully more responsible than just trucking it off. Now, I would say at this time that, and Mary Ellen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we got to the point where, in the studies, that there was a number of sites identified on the island that had possibilities. But each of the sites also came along with a number of problems of their own accord. Either the site was steep, or it was relatively too close to other residences. And so while there was interest, there still wasn't the push to keep everything right away on the island. So what I would say was, in our inability to move ahead with the composting on island as it was described to us of the ways to do it 5 to 7 years ago, what we've done now is we have actually benefited from watching other communities go ahead with some of the technology that was available at the time, and some of them unfortunately have had not the best experiences, with a number of communities having to close their facilities due to increased problems with how the programs were running. So what we've been able to do basically in the last year or so is to have a better understanding of where the technology is now and what is available to us now and going forward. There seems to be a much better idea of how we can deal with it in a way that we're not going to run into the problems that the other communities did. And if you were watching the news just recently, one of the biggest facilities in Richmond that takes over 100,000 tons of compost material is no longer going to renew their contract or go after a new contract, and they're going to close their facility. So,
Any particular reason why?
well, costs.
Cost, but also smell.
Yes,
There's a
so
lot of issues locally.
the big thing for them is the way that that particular facility is run. They do have problems with odor, and they have had for a number of years. And they've been asked by Metro Vancouver to improve the facility in a number of ways so that they can continue with their permit. However, it's becoming increasingly costly for them. And now from a business point of view, because they are a private company, they're no longer seeing it as a sustainable business practice. So here we are today with Bowen Island with an annual 560 ton, possibly, well, probably more this coming year, that was last year. And at least 35 to 40% of that is food waste. And I think it's time for us to have a look at where we're going with it on island, and also some of the risk factors that we're now incurring from the contractor's point of view. There's more costs becoming associated with the food waste and the yard waste, and we did have a large hike last year of 34% in our dump fees and a number of other increases for transporting. So as we move ahead, it's great to know that there's a committee here who would like to hear their ideas about, maybe with a little bit of input from us, where we might see things going in the not too distant future here, because we have a lot more technology at our fingertips. And that's where Colin gets to come in, because we've been pursuing a little bit more information, and I think there's some things that you'll agree are interesting and will be worthwhile.
So just let me give a little background on myself and Alastair, who's on the phone. I've only been in Bowen Island less than a year, and this just recently 14 days. And both my kids are here on island and they're going to school here. So I'm relatively new. However, I lived in BC for over 6 years. But most of the time I've lived in different parts of the world. Recently California, Panama, before that New York, and then Europe, and then Africa. So my background has been in finance and looking at new technologies from a wide range of perspectives. One of the gentlemen on the phone here is Alastair Cotton. He is an environmental engineer, and we've been together on probably the last 10 years on projects all over the world. Alastair much more on the environmental side, and I'm more in a variety of businesses. So we look at these technologies and we try to assess whether these technologies get to a certain level which they're applicable for to go mainstream. And this particular one, and we've researched this for several years and have had different variations of it. And I will let Alastair give his viewpoints on this. But what I'd like you to do first is just take a quick look at the first video, and you'll get a very quick idea of what we're doing. So, step. So, this machine produces between 5 to 7 tons a month, and you're looking at the end product, which is can be pelletized and used as a fuel, or it can be used as an additive in the garden. It's very small. You simply dump the organic material in it, and it heats up to about 120 degrees, and that's your output. So the technology, as you can see, this is not Einstein, but it's now come to a point where it's extremely efficient.
Did you say 5 to 7 tons a month?
Yes.
Produces 5 to 7 tons.
Yeah, that particular machine. So, and the machines can be developed in all sorts of sizes. We actually have a group in Ireland that we represent as well, that we can produce as much as 20 to 30 ton machines. So there's no particular limit. It's just the ones that we have right now that are available to us, and the ones that we like the most are between 5 and 7.
So those 5 to 7 tons, is that in the result, or what
It's
do
the
you?
result.
That's the
Yeah.
result.
Yeah.
Okay. So what would it take initially? What would-
Well, you've got a lot of material, and you have a PowerPoint to go through. So what I just wanted you to do is just see what we're presenting. And if we quickly go through the PowerPoint, then you also have about 3 that we've already.
Yeah, it's left and right. Come on,
Oh,
right.
that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go back to the left, and there's a little pointer up there.
Alex, are you still with us?
Yes, correct.
Great. So we came to Louise over a year ago, and the machines that we were most interested in were a group from Ireland who had specialized in making this type of machine, and it also is now made in Canada. Simply, it decreases the waste fees, reduces operating costs, display environmental stewardship, and the production of usable byproduct. Those are the main goals of this type of machine. The machine itself takes the product going in and it reduces it by about 80%. So you're left between 25 and 20% of product left. The organic waste is processed on a current service yard. It's very small, as you can see. That machine there, as you'll see in some of the pictures, can fit in virtually any one of the systems that we're looking at to put it at. And there's quite a few successful deployments now. When this was done, I think there's now upwards of 42 now deployed throughout the region. That's the machine again.
How large is it?
Well, how did I do that?
It varies
Again,
in size.
yeah,
Yeah.
it varies in size. We can have very small ones. There's a small one that can fit for a hotel. And it can go to an extremely large one. You can go to 20, 30 tons per day.
That was one of the issues that we looked at in the on-island composting group, just how much space was going to be required. And
Well, the one that we have shown you is the one we're suggesting. So it's a very, the space that it occupies is very minimal.
That one that we just saw is about 3.5 meters by 60 centimeters wide by 90 centimeters high.
Yeah,
So-
Alice,
It's about 2.5 feet wide, about 13 feet long. And again, if you were to look at it from a footprint perspective, that system, basically that size of system replaces what you would have in a traditional sense where you're, composting. So you would take the organic material, let's say 7 tons, then of course you would require anywhere between 7 to 10 tons of fill material, which is generally wood waste, bark mulch, and the like. So now your piles increase basically double. And then of course you have to continually mix it and do all that kind of stuff. And then you, what you call wind row it in order that it dries because it's very hot in that pile and needs to break down and get to its final stage, the wind row stage. So in terms of footprint, you go from a significantly large area because you need A, room for the pile, then you need B, room for all the big machines, you ground loaders to, mix it all up and all that kind of stuff. So this significantly reduces that footprint.
so what would it reduce it to in terms of acreage?
So what we're dealing with right now, the main idea is that we're talking about food waste. And not for us, the yard waste component of our collection is a totally different scenario altogether. We're going to a much bigger production. We're talking shredding and storing and moving, and what we thought right off the bat, which seems to be one of the biggest problems for organic waste, is the food production and food waste, particularly because we're collecting it differently at different times of the year. And in order to have an above ground system that works, we have to have the right component of green and food and brown waste. And in the winter, the collection sites that we get is predominantly food waste, probably 85 to 90% food waste only, no yard waste. So if we just dealt with the food waste alone, we're looking at 35 to 40% of our collection as a reduction, as a first phase on the island, which it fits into this size of
But again, to come back to the question, and it was a critical question, as Mary Ellen will agree. When we were discussing this within the composting group, we were trying to figure out how much space would actually be required for the operation of on-island composting. And you may get to this in your presentation, but that's a critical issue.
yeah, when you see the pictures, these are actual pictures of what we would require here. Because these numbers have been based basically on your system.
So again,
So
how
you-
much space?
Well,
In terms
if
of
you look at the current area where the garbage is disposed of, we
Mhm.
would take probably about 200 to 300 square meters. 200 to 300 square
So
meters.
not a lot.
So we're
Yeah,
talking,
when you see the building you see it housed in is very small.
it's about the size of a container, one of our containers.
Okay, that's great. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
And then there's other things you have to have, though. We may have a automatic feeder, which would allow us to at least store some for a few days. So I just don't want you to get the idea that that's the total size of the footprint until we exactly design it. And I think, Alastair, you would suggest that too, right?
So this part is for food waste only?
Yes.
Thanks.
So,
Yeah, it's basically the exact same model that we're doing in the Clackamas Sound, so Kilo Tofino, where impact on landfill is 30 to 38%, and that's just the organic matter from households and primarily restaurants, the larger waste generators. It doesn't include grass clippings and the like. And we're following the exact same model, however, from a decentralized perspective. So we're providing the systems in varying configuration sizes to the larger waste generators. The first one that was just placed, the co-op in the Hewlett, where they're generating anywhere. They don't really have a handle on it. Like a lot of people know the number for sure of generating, it all gets mixed in, but we're currently looking at anywhere between 3 tons an hour. With these guys, depends on season, and that particular system literally is 13 feet long, 2.5 feet wide. In their particular case, it doesn't have a hopper because they're just hand feeding. They come out every day with their buckets and they just pour it into the machine, close the lid, and they go back inside and carry on with their day. And the machine is autonomous, so it just processes the product that's moved through, and it's called point container. It reduces the overall volume because, of course, it's 70-80% water in there, in the organic matter, and really all it's doing is drying it out, but in a very efficient and effective fashion, so at the end of the process, the material that comes out is similar to what they call auto fluff, if you're familiar with it, or what they call a refuse, the derived fuel. So it's highly combustible, it's dry, it's pathogen-free, so it doesn't carry any pathogens because it's plus 60 degrees inside the equipment. So it's safe to handle, there's no odor, there's no smell to it. The only thing I'd caution you is, just as Jody brought some to the last meeting, as an example from one of the other systems, it looks like a bag of hash. So you don't want to pack it out anywhere.
I did not bring hash. That's what that is.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be
it's good.
smoking.
It's good as legalized.
We'll have to get RCMP in to give us a permit.
Exactly. Yeah, it could become quite profitable, you never know.
So, go ahead.
Jeff, I have a question. The water gets driven off as vapor?
Correct. Yeah, there's a little bit of moisture, and the moisture that comes off of the equipment is really just condensation. So it goes down a PVC tube, and it comes out as a very, very small amount of condensation off the end of the tube. But it's not dirty water, so it looks like clear condensate.
And the volume per day?
Moisture content, again, it's all sort of variable upon where you're at in the season that we're in at the time. But in the Hewlett case, let's take that as an example. Over the couple of days of processing, there was maybe 7-8 ounces of water or condensate that was coming out of the system.
Right, so it sounds fairly minor amount of water in liquid form.
Selectable.
Right.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
What happens to the rest of the moisture that just dried out?
It just vaporizes within the equipment, yeah.
Let's let our presenters finish and then we'll ask questions.
Sorry, yeah.
So, Alastair, we just run through, you pretty well took us right to the end, but as usual, engineering just says everything and he's quite concise. But this is, this slide actually shows you the waste material going into the machine. There's also a hopper type system, which you can see that hopper is connected to the system and it automatically feeds it. Then you have, when it's loaded into that wonderful pretty machine there, you get this wonderful little soil additive or fuel at the end that you saw on the video. So that's what it looks like up in Ucluelet. That's the size of the machine. That's running at 3 tons a month right now, right, Alastair? Did I lose you? I think we lost.
Sorry.
Yeah, Ucluelet is running at what number of tons right now?
Between 3 and 7.
3 and 7.
And that's finished product.
7 is sort of high.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's product collected and gone into the machine.
Oh, no.
Okay, so your finished product is 80%.
Okay, so that's quite a bit smaller than what we're looking at here then.
No.
We need, from Louise's number, somewhere around 25 to 30.
So we collect, generally in the winter, it can be around 3 tons a week of food waste. In the summer, we're up to four ton
Yeah, sorry, that's per week.
per week.
That's per week. The machines run per week, not per month.
Okay, all right.
Sorry, so
That's
these
so
machines would
the
be.
size we're talking about.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right, got it.
So a lot of what we'd be thinking about clearly here is separating food waste, and we'd have the availability to pick our feedstock from where we want it. And if we had a concern with anything with the machine, we still can fall back onto our tried and true, put it in the bin and drive it away. Any overflow that we couldn't handle if we had something, extraordinary, we do have that ability to go back to what we need to do.
May I ask, just
Yep.
what kind of labor is required to support this? Like, what do you have to do in addition to the machine doing its thing?
So to load it, or?
Yeah.
So what we'd be talking about is picking up the food waste in our smaller trucks, and they go to the yard now, and basically they back up the ramp and they dump into our 47-yard containers. So what we'd be doing is we'd be taking food waste only pickups, and those trucks would be backed up to a hopper. And then the hopper would, now we were talking about this, store and feed.
Well, it depends on the amount of product we actually are processing each day.
We're still trying to figure
Still.
out how,
How,
what's the best scenario for feeding it, but it would be a hopper-fed scenario, and then it would be fed, it runs 24 hours a day, and the output is over 24 hours, isn't it?
it's 24 hours. yeah.
So, yeah.
And does it need to be monitored during that period?
No.
Or it just does its business? And
Yeah.
So, Alastair, maybe you can answer that question.
Yeah, the system is operating with a PLC, which is just a logic control system, a computer. And the system, through a number of different areas within the overall machine, is able to recognize how much biomass is located in what area of the equipment. So as the hopper is loaded, the feeder, or basically the auger, will then dose from the hopper into the equipment the amount of organic matter that's required to take up that missed volume, and or the volume that's required to keep the machine in continuous flow. But it is standalone. It truly is red light, green light technology. It's loaded. You hit start, and away she goes. And at the end of the process, there's a bucket or a sealed container at the end of the process, which the derived fuel then pours into, and then you just basically have to use that fuel, whether you use it for some sort of soil abatement, as Colin pointed out, and or it's used for fuel. And then, not to get you off track, but in Util's case specifically, that refuse-derived fuel is going to go into a small 5x5 biomass boiler, which will then heat the building to a degree and offset their annual costs, like $25,000 a year, something like. So the system is, as I said, standalone. You basically put the organic matter in, hit start, and away she goes. It also has SCADA capability, which simply put just means that it remotely monitors and will message, as well as, of course, alert operator if there's any faults and the like, which are easily rectified. And again, the system platform as a whole, and I'll stop after this, is solely based on a modular systems approach. So PLC, augers, dryers, exit equipment, the whole shebang is built in such a fashion that the panel is removed, that component easily slips out of the system, and a component is replaced if you have failure. The point there being is that the O&M cycle, the operations and maintenance, which is a big impact cost center for most companies, is extremely low. And it's very easy, and these are off-the-shelf pieces of equipment, so they're not things that we have to have manufactured in Switzerland or something of that nature.
Okay, I've got a series of questions, but maybe I'll wait. Let's
I think we're, okay, this is the opportunity, the opportunity is the business case. I'm not gonna go through the numbers, which is more where I am at on the numbers, but currently, the way we've looked at this system for this location, we can have a payback of the system between 24 and 36 months. Now, there's some caveats on the way we look at the system, but because to go through each line item for you, and since this is introductory, I would rather wait. But just know that the payback is substantially less than most screen technology that you'll ever see.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Really interesting presentation. I've got a couple of questions. I mean, in terms of the payback and so on, I mean, this is a business opportunity. From the municipality's perspective, that's somebody else's business. It's Louise's business, your business. We need to look at what the opportunity is for the municipality and issues and so on. But the idea of being able to take our stuff and make compost here is a fantastic idea rather than having to ship it off. So it's a great idea, and I'm sure the municipality would support it in a broad sense if it works economically. I've got a couple of questions. So from your description, I have a better understanding. I sort of assumed it was like a sealed box, you fill it up, and in 48 hours you dump it out. But no, it's a continuous process, which is great. But Louise, you're doing the collection of food waste once per week, and then it's being continually fed into here. So you're keeping your stuff in the hopper for potentially 5-6 days before it's gone, which is going to be smelly. So thoughts about that? Is a hopper a sealed thing just like
the hopper is sealed.
Okay, good.
And you can also seal it within a building.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have a building plus a sealed hopper,
Yeah.
but we had looked at collecting it over 2 periods rather than one.
Sure, I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
Makes it simple.
We have the flexibility
Yeah,
to make 2 collection days, an east side or west side,
sure.
you know.
You're right. And then you'd have a different collection for your other green waste.
For the other green waste is a totally different
Right.
scenario for the island, and while I would love for you guys at another point to consider something so that we don't have to truck it off, that would be great.
Yeah.
And it's just to answer in 2 parts, in terms of the smell, very similar to the larger systems that we design and manufacture in place, and these are quite substantial systems. Those systems work on it, and we would do something very similar with this system on a negative air basis. So what that means is that it's drawing air in rather than pushing air out. And it's a very simplified process. So one is a container, let's just say it's a container, it just has a very simplified carbon charcoal filter system, so it's pulling air in, and then it's passing it through the exit side of the building, which is a positive side of the building, and then of course it's flowing through charcoal filter as well. So in terms of odor, and remember I come from the solid municipal waste background, and that's stinky stuff, and we've never had an issue with smell or animal incursion or anything of that nature. And in terms of the other biomass, the woody waste, the grass clippings and the like, again, the old methodology of composting and turning it and flopping it around and all that kind of stuff, the yellow machinery and all that kind of the overheads and the management side is a very, very expensive process. It's much simpler just to have a simplified, and I mean simplified as in these are very advanced systems. It's a shredder, and it uses a 2-part system. So part is hammer mill and part is shredder. And it's finely screened, and it's a very small impact on our footprint. So you're looking at, roughly a system that's doing around 20 tons a day, which is a lot. And that system is about the size of a full-size pickup truck. Not a little gaffer, like a full-size pickup truck. So it's not very large, has a very large hopper at the top. And at the end of the process, it produces a very fine particulate compost matter, which again is a very high valuable product that's used in biomass boilers and the like. And for a very low cost factor, you would simply just go to a straightforward pelletizer or puck. So it literally it would look it can go right back to the community, and that's, I think, what Colin was talking about in terms of stewardship. And the beautiful part about it is all we can use. So none of it goes to landfill, none of it gets tossed, and it's all used back in the community. And a lot cheaper in terms of doing the old-fashioned way in terms of, flipping and flopping it. And as you pointed out earlier, the Richmond facility is a good example. And in fact, we have basically every hauler that is currently taking waste to Richmond phoning us and begging us for a solution now, because they're all desperate.
They're worried, we're worried.
So Alastair, you again, but any other questions that are?
I've got quite a few, yeah.
Yes,
Well,
go
this is
ahead.
really quite fantastic, and, it seems like a magic box. I mean, I've been interested in this. I was looking at my election brochure. I ran for council back 15 years ago, and there I promised to do composting on the island. And and I also worked on this at Metro Vancouver over the last, decade or so. And I know all the problems. I've visited the Richmond site and the smell and all the things we're trying to do. And obviously a closed system is the way to go, but to this point, all the ones that I've seen are very expensive. And so this is really quite fantastic. I can see also that we can have it, we do this as a pilot, we do this for a while, and then we could be able to do the whole thing if we were able to, get a chipper and so on. But we do this first.
We did do financials for you, the
Oh, okay.
cost of it. So in the whole, I'm gonna send this PowerPoint to you. Rather than going through it and going through the
Sure.
financials, I can go through each step with you, even on the way we did the savings and the way it was
Yeah.
calculated. So we have done fairly extensively, not as detailed probably as we could, but it was based on the information that we both have had access to. So, and the other thing that you might want to, since you have so much background, is that there are these machines available now, and you need to see them as Mark. I think you can attest to what you saw as the smell and the type of product that came out. You found it to be.
Yeah, no, there was no.
So just so you know, on food waste, yard waste pickup day,
Yeah.
it smells when we pick it up from the house,
Yeah.
it smells in the truck,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it smells when we dump it,
Sure.
and luckily, we can get it off island generally within 24 hours.
Yeah.
But, during the week of it sitting in people's homes to the point where we get it, there's still always going to be an
Yeah.
operational
Yeah.
smell of some sort.
Yeah.
But as you say, you don't want to be holding on to it for too long.
I've got another question about the product. So we also import a lot of compost because we don't have a lot of soil on this island. I bought tons of the stuff. How good is it? Are the nutrients, like it's cooked, so are the nutrients?
It's not soil which you can use in the garden, expect to grow flowers, as I would like to.
Okay.
But it is, Alastair, you might as well give the answer.
Yeah.
Much more
Yeah,
detailed.
this is in essence, it is killing everything in the drying process. So there is no nutrient value. It can be used as a soil filler and all those types of good things, but it basically is like peat moss.
Peat
It's,
moss.
okay, it's like a peat moss.
It's
It'll
an amendment.
It'll hold moisture for you.
Yeah, correct. It's
Okay.
an amendment. You're absolutely correct. Now, conversely, our other technology, it deals with microbes, and it is a concoction of different microbes that are added. So when that product is post-processed, that product is quite high nutrient rich. However, that process is much more entailed, and it's not as the equipment is not as cost effective as this piece of kit for your particular needs. In terms of the compost that you import, if you're to take all of those grass clippings and trees and all that kind of stuff that we talked about before and run it through that system that I described, you would end up with a very high nutrient-rich compost at the end of that process if you didn't want to use it for a biomass or a heating product.
Okay.
And the whole object of the point initially was how can we reduce the cost for taking care of our food waste, yard waste locally. It wasn't necessarily presenting a grade A finished product to start,
Right.
but,
Right.
you know, it, as you say, pilot project, way to start. As Colin has mentioned in the past, when I've been concerned about, are we going to get so exuberant in our collection of food waste, yard waste, that we exceed our quotas for the machine, there's the possibility of doubling it up. So that's an option too, so.
What we did, we also analyzed the sludge processing system that you have to deal with currently in the sewer. So we can also run a machine there, which
Yeah.
would also do the same
Yeah.
to that system as you would have with this system. So you have the effect of having two possibilities here, which could balance out any overage. Okay, and when you really do get into the savings, now, the financial side's more what I look at, because if they don't make sense to me, I don't wanna be here.
Right.
And Alastair is the environmentalist who'd rather save the planet. So, I said that right, Alastair?
Yeah.
So, this is financially also very beneficial to the community, and it works on islands.
Well, I
First
want to ask
and
about that,
foremost.
but Alan's got a question
I
first.
just have a question. If it were possible for, through your experience in other places, to provide some information on the composition of the product, because, you know, the nitrogen, for example, won't go into the atmosphere, the phosphorus won't go into the atmosphere, so it'd be interesting to know what is left in there, given that
Alastair, do
our
you know that
interest
already?
is more in the, maybe soil amendment side rather than fuel side.
Alastair?
Sure. Yeah, I can provide you with some case data on a couple of operating systems, and that will give you, it's pretty close to home on each one, and it will then tell you exactly that information, what is residing.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll forward that to Colin, and Colin will send it out to you guys.
Good, thanks. Maureen's got a question?
Yeah, I've got a couple. One is, I've got four. One is whether there is the potential to use this system in the long run for handling green waste.
Yes, but there's other systems that are compatible to this as well.
Okay. And then the second is the cost of the machine itself. You flagged as being roughly $89K. So I'm wondering what the ask is here.
Yeah.
Are you asking for support from this committee to consider this? I know that the Bowen Waste contract is up for consideration in the coming year. Is that what you're asking for?
I wanted to make sure that it was being talked about. So when the contract is being negotiated, as it is right now, it's something that I could feel free about bringing up and implementing in some way that without me having it written up in the contract and then having it all stopped for whatever reason, right? So by us being able to present to you, you have a better idea of what we would have available to us as we, the stars are kind of aligning, right? So. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Maureen. That's a great question. I was gonna ask the same one, but just to make sure I understand. So what you're asking us is just make sure we're familiar with what you're talking about and we support the idea, if it's great for the community. It's your business proposal, and you're not asking for a joint venture or something of that sort.
Well, the thing is, when I sit down with Raj and we talk
Yeah.
about it, we can decide where we're going to go with this.
Yeah.
But there was no point in even, bringing
Right.
up, and if
If we said,
for some reason.
we don't like this idea for some
Yeah,
reason.
but we really like seeing the trucks on the ferry.
Right.
And we want to park right behind it.
Maureen, keep going, thanks.
Last question. When you introduce something like this in communities, you must invariably run into certain challenges. So what are those challenges? What makes this a good project for a community?
It's been tried and tested in Europe and in Ireland and England for quite a while. And there's a lot of testimonials. This is the Irish machine, which is the micro machines. And I'd let Alastair again, where it's been implemented, there hasn't been any pushback. And in fact, they've asked for more machines.
Is it visible to the community what's going on? Or
Well,
does it
this-
just sort of happen behind the scenes?
So Alastair, why don't you answer those questions? Because you...
Sure, can you just quickly repeat them to me?
Sorry.
Sorry, I have a very
Is
soft
that-
voice.
sorry.
I'm just curious about sort of the community response to this. Is this something that ends up being visible to the community, or does it just sort of happen behind the scenes and...
Yeah, no, we're all about transparency, and I'm not sure exactly what you're hoping the answer is going to be, but we're all about transparency. And what generally we like to do, for instance, again, a good case example is the Banff Springs Hotel. It's about or let's just go to the Ucluelet first as the best example. So we involved both mayoral councils, both mayors. We involved the ACRD, which is the regional district. We held informational sessions with all of the prime players, First Nations, all stakeholders in the community, as well as informing community members. We wanted the community to be fully aware and have input. Again, it's to remove those barriers so they don't feel that some swift one's being pulled on them and we stuck something in the back door. As well, we want to show them and listen to them in terms of hearing what their concerns are, and of course, addressing those with the logical answers that are available for us. And then, of course, putting those fears at ease. And as I was about to say, we like to overlay it with a very transparent reporting mechanism that is available to go back to community. So the community has both, they feel that they have say in the project, they feel that their, concerns have been addressed, and they feel that there is transparency. Plus, they're given updates on a monthly or yearly basis, quarterly basis on the performance of the machine, what the inputs, what the outputs are looking like. You don't have to go into overheads per se, but really push forward and make clear the actual benefits of the community. And in there would be things like, no more, which we would help do those calculations with you, no more wheels on road transport, no more diesel use by ferry, no more pulling the waste to the landfill. And just for funsies, as you know, even if you compost in an open air environment, if you take that 1 ton of waste and you put it in the landfill or in a compost facility, it will, at a minimum, create 2.5 tons of greenhouse gas. And that's organic matter as well. Now, with the organic matter, it's not too bad because people see it as already inventoried carbon. So people kind of make that right with themselves. But at the end of the day, it still produces a significant amount of greenhouse gases. And that's what we're avoiding. And when you're able to publish that information to community and say, as a community, we've avoided roads on wheels, cost of tires, diesel, transporting on a ferry, go to landfill, all that adds up, plus the greenhouse gas effect, you're literally saving thousands of tons of carbon, or greenhouse gas, entering the atmosphere, which as a community enhancer, it looks good for everybody. And it makes the community feel happy and proud about what they're doing and where they're living and all that kind of stuff. And in terms of the equipment, the validity side of the equipment, and just to give you a really quick background, we've been doing this for a very long time. We have equipment placed on larger scale equipment now, particularly dealing with municipal solid waste, but in there, of course, is the organic matter because most of these places don't separate it. So we'll get, anywhere between a ton to a couple of 100 tons of waste, municipal waste a day that's filled with organics, which represent, upwards of 30+% of the actual volume. That's all going into these gasification systems and basically becoming ash at the end of the day. And in those cases, again, what we do is we have an overlay of full transparency. Just as we did in Ucluelet, press release, everybody's invited to go and have a boo. They warm very quickly to the idea, and in fact, what ends up happening is, for instance, the wonderful lady at the co-op in Ucluelet has invited the smaller generators, like the restaurants across the street, the guys down the road, who really can't use a physical machine because they just don't have the volume. She's now prepared to take their volume and put it in their system. So it becomes a community effort, and everybody gets involved. There's a lot of positive awareness, and anyways, I'll stop rambling there. So it's transparency and it's informative value to the community.
And Maureen, I'm for implementation.
Pardon?
So I'm for implementation because Alastair has done so many things with the communities, and I think communities like this have to make decisions. And you guys are going to be responsible for those decisions, and what the output of those decisions is publicized by our group. So it is completely open, but a lot of people don't want to see all that data except the people that are in charge of it. And,
Well, I think what you've got going for you here is that there's an enormous amount of trust and respect for Bowen Waste.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right.
Thanks.
I have to tell you that I've met quite a few people in the industry, and so is Alastair. And she is so straightforward and so direct and so precise in what she says. And hopefully we can show you the same thing.
Excellent. Thank
Well,
you.
we've gone from a tape deck to, past the CD, and we're moving right on.
So Bonnie has a question.
I was just wondering, I can't remember, did you say that Uculit was doing biofuel? Was it Uculit that was going to be using the product to heat?
Yes.
Yeah. And then what do other communities do with the output?
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead, Alastair.
there's all kinds of applications. So you could take, for instance, the donkey farm. It's all of the manure and fodder from the farm that goes into the system. The system creates a pelletized product, which is the fuel side, and then of course it's used for heating purposes. The public school does the same. The system in Saskatchewan does the same as the YMCA heats the pool. And most people turn to the heating rather than the abatement system or the amendment to the soil system because of the cost of heating. The electrical and of course the heating of water, for instance, is extremely expensive, probably the biggest cost center in your home. So that tangible offsetter is very appealing to communities and individuals, clients alike. In terms of the soil enhancement or amendment, that's also very popular. But again, more from a peat moss sort of water, somebody put it all together quite nicely there in the room in terms of what it does with water and the like. It's really about the fuel side in most cases, to be honest. It's what people want to do to further offset energy use within their homes and the like.
But as an island, I mean, we looked at the first system, which was to produce a soil system and actually return it to the community. And an island really requires that soil comes trucked on just the same as garbage. So it was a system that we looked at, and we would again go back to that system. But it's a much more, you would say, Alastair, it's a much harder system to run. This is a very easy system to run.
Yeah, I would say that the other system, which is microbial or uses microbes, that system isn't harder per se because the microbes are dosed in. You're not standing there with a measuring cup or eyedropper trying to do the job. They're dosed in, and all it's doing is taking that theoretical great big pile, which the front end loader is moving around, and it just puts it into an enclosed mechanical environment where it's the machine doing all of that internally and at a rapid pace rather than it naturally trying to digest out on the lot, if you will. And as we had talked about, or as Colin mentioned, when you look at your sewerage waste, I'm not 100% sure if I remember correctly on how you're treating your sewerage, but in other areas what is done is that we take the sewerage, we pass it through a very small system, it gets further deep watered, and then we create what they call a friable cake. And that's actually a technical term. I don't know who thinks these things up, but it's called a friable cake. And it is basically all the water is pulled from it. Any of the moisture that comes, or the water that is removed from the friable cake, or the biosolids, comes out as what they call a Chesapeake Bay Title 22, which is probably one of the most rigid titles in North America, or standards to go to, which is the EPA standard. And what that means is the water is technically drinkable. Now, we don't suggest that you drink it because that freaks a lot of people out, but by law it's allowed to be put directly onto fruit vegetables. Now, the cake at the end of it comes in one of two fashions. It's either completely void of any pathogens, but it still has a nutrient value to it, or it becomes pathogen loaded, which you don't want. So we go for the previous, which is the non-pathogen loaded, but contains high value phosphorus, nitrogen, and the like. And then it is then processed in with those grass cuttings and the like. A good example is here on Vancouver Island. You may have heard of it. They call it rocket. So what it is, it's the sewage sludge that is pulled from the ponding facilities, and then it is placed in an open air area where they compost it with wood chips and the like. Let it break down. It takes a very long period of time, but they now pre-sell it before it's even bagged, and they sell it at a very high premium because it is just like fish compost. You know, you put it on your lawn, and if you walk in it and then you walk around the lawn, the next day you can see where all your footprints were because the grass is, you know, brilliant green, the shape of your foot. My kids used to go and write stuff in the yard, so you know, the next day we'd see all this weird writing in the yard. So there's a lot to do outside of the organics, just the day-to-day vegetable, say organic matter, in terms of using your other biomass, the woody and the grass clippings and the like, which is a much larger significant volume, and then of course mixing it in with the sewerage, which again, sewage is sort of a dirty thing, not in the sense of its physical dirtiness, but to a lot of people that just either don't want to hear about it or they just get turned off when you discuss it. But it does ring true to a lot of people because they're quite concerned where it goes at the end of the day. You know, Victoria, for instance, they
Alastair?
water sewage and
Alastair,
yeah.
I'm going to cut you off because you're going to, okay, you've done a great job. Sorry, are there any more questions?
Mark has a question.
So, just in crunching some numbers, from what Louise said, with this system we generate about 47 tons of end product per year. So, and I'm really interested in the using it as a biofuel. So, and I'm very interested to get the information on the composting and the makeup, because Alan brought up a good point that the nutrients are still in it, and it would be a great soil amendment, but that's a lot of stuff. So I'm wondering, when I saw the system in Calgary, something they were talking about was pelletizing it and burning it in a wood stove, like for homeowners. How is that? And they were having trouble pelletizing it to the point where it would stay pelletized. But is that a viable option?
It is, and again, the pelletizing system that was applied in that particular case, it was non-wax coated. So what ends up happening is that, unlike wood waste, when it is processed in a large facility for pelletizing wood, this particular system is not using a wax coating. You'll notice that when you buy pellets for a wood stove, they have that kind of shiny sheen to them.
Yep.
That's a wax coating. Kind of like making sausages. So it has to have that wax coating or it just won't hold together. It just literally falls apart. So it's just a matter of the choice of equipment that they decided to apply in that particular case. But to pelletize, absolutely. That's what happens with the donkey farm in England and the school. They're pelletizing, it's wax coated and used in a biomass.
Thanks, Mark, that's another piece of equipment.
Yeah.
It's a really simple piece of equipment.
So
Can I
there's a
just
couple
give-
more questions.
Yeah, Maureen's
Hang
got
on
one.
a second.
Or Al, are you okay?
Can I just ask one
Yeah,
more
and
quick
Maureen,
question? And I don't know if you can answer this, but using this pelletized system to generate heat, Is it possible to create something to generate electricity?
That was our major
Yeah.
company to begin with, Waste Energy.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll go into that
Okay.
now.
But it,
The
yeah,
answer is yes.
Yeah.
okay, that's all, yeah.
So we've spent almost 10 years on
Okay,
that system alone. And Alastair has huge depth in that.
Awesome.
There was a question here, so.
I was just
Yeah.
curious about the wax. Are we talking like a beeswax or a paraffin wax, or is that something, if it's burned, does that create, just in terms of
Yeah.
product, what is it?
Yeah, so it's either a paraffin-based and or beeswax. Again, your choice. It's really up to the end client. In terms of volume, to give you an example, the pelletizing plant, it's called an extruding plant, that I, was part of for many, many years. That plant, at the close of cycle at the end of the year, we produced 17,000 metric tons of pelletized product, and we used 45 gallons of paraffin wax. Like, it really is just a very small splattering on the outside.
Right.
Yeah. And in terms of its emissions profile, it's not even at a detectable limit.
Right. Maureen?
And Marie?
Yeah, just we have a number of municipal capital projects on the horizon.
Right.
The community center, the fire hall, etc. And one of the things that those projects have been looking to is some innovative, sustainable ways of providing fuel, etc. So I'm basically channeling Sue Ellen here. If Sue Ellen was here,
Yeah.
she would have made that connection. So
Right.
Sue Ellen, here you are. But I think it's a connection that's important.
Yeah. But to do that, we would require some sort of pelletization, unless we had a burner of some sort that could just take a kind of a powdery stuff, I don't know.
Yeah, but we manufacture and supply standalone biomass boilers. So
Okay.
as the product, say for instance, without a pelletizer, these are designed to go without pelletizing.
Okay.
Pelletizing was just something I was
Okay.
nattering on about. Now, the refuse-derived fuel, which is that product that comes out the ass into the system,
Yeah.
which is, it's hard to describe, but it really is just kind of a granulated, somewhat.
We've got a sample of it. We've got a sample
Okay.
of it here.
That is fed directly into the biomass boiler. And it just goes right from the system to the biomass boiler, fired, creates hot water, and Bob's your uncle. It really is that simple. So you don't actually have to pelletize it.
Okay.
And the system that I saw where they were making this, it was a laundromat. So that's how they heat their water. They produce this, they have a bioreactor, off they go.
There is
That's
another
it.
video that shows that exact thing, but I'll send all this to you.
Do you want me to put the one
So,
Okay, this is really good. We used all our time, but so how are we doing for questions? Do you have some questions?
Well, I just have one
Okay.
question about the use of the energy. Because if we were to use the energy, say at home waste, I know what to use it on. Is it possible?
Heat the recycling depot.
Yes.
I thought there might be a little bit of energy left over. And could you feed that back into the electrical grid and then draw off the electrical grid?
Alistair,
I don't know.
If you were generating electricity.
Yeah.
you have to.
The short answer is yes.
Yes, it's very comfortable.
Yeah, okay.
And it's
Yeah.
very expensive.
Okay.
But
And
I can
exactly.
say
And
there's
we're-
some really great systems though. that
And
we
we're-
worked on.
We're sharing the yard with BC Hydro, so we don't want to get.
Oh,
That's right.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Hearing none, I think we can move on. That was a really, really interesting
Yes,
presentation.
thank you very much.
Really quite interesting. Thanks a lot, Alastair.
Alistair, thank you.
Thank
We
you.
really like the
Pleasure,
details.
Thanks, Alistair.
Thanks, Alistair.
everybody.
We have to move to Bowen.
Yeah. I've been there a
Send
few
this
times.
on a revised agenda to you, and then there's enough video here, a 4-minute video that's
The URL is in the last page.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, bye-bye.
Okay.
I really liked, I do really hear waste in the conversation. I heard that, so I really liked. Yeah. Getting that.
Concentrate on the resource
Right,
value.
yeah.
No, and then that's what this is all about, is
Yeah.
using it as a resource, for sure.
It's, yeah, as I said, I looked at my own brochure and there it was 15 years ago. And,
Better late than never.
We're remaining on honesty, is that?
but, you know, over the years, as Louise has said, all kinds of people were trying to do this at Metro Vancouver, all kinds of people, even apartment buildings were setting up their own systems, and they would work sort of, and they would break, and then there were smells, and so on and so forth. It's a tricky business. So this really, I would have loved to have heard more about how this machine, this magic black box works, but that was for another time.
Right.
Because it seems like a magic black box.
Yeah.
And it does this in 24 hours. Astonishing.
Just a quick note, point, part of what I would like, I mean, I understand this, Louise doesn't want to include yard waste yet, it's a
Yeah.
step, and I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
This machine gets up to 120 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, that's all.
So, in terms of dealing with yard waste and invasive species, one of the big ones is knotweed.
Yeah.
I'm a big knotweed person.
Right.
The research that I've been kind of done, you want to hit 50 degrees over a 24-hour period to kill knotweed.
Yeah.
So, and that's an old estimate, I don't know, but at 120, so that's going to take care of it. So
Yeah.
that's one of the concerns that would happen down the road, but.
Right. Yeah. So compared to composting, where you just have things in pile and turn it over, where you might not get to anywhere near the heat that you were.
I think too, maybe for me, I love the idea,
Yeah.
but just managing a little bit of expectation, because I think people think that that's soil, or they may think that's soil.
Yeah.
okay? So
And he was very clear about that.
yeah, he really was,
Yeah.
but I think just the
Yeah.
general public.
Alan's question was really like, those things don't, like the nitrogen, it can't disappear, right?
That's right. Conservation matters, one of those laws.
And the phosphorus, it can't disappear.
And that's why this is a good amendment.
Yeah.
If you take this and put it in your garden soil at small amounts, you could
Yeah.
easily get into stupid amounts, but it's sterile, but you have your microorganisms in your soil. If you mix that in, it's inoculated, and
Yeah.
the fungus is gonna go nuts over that. It's gonna be great.
Right.
But you have to be careful, because you can, like when you make a compost tea, it's very easy when you make compost teas to get the toxic levels of a lot of different micronutrients and get into leaching problems. So
Yeah.
it's not like a magic bullet in that term,
Right.
but it's definitely a valuable
As
resource.
an amendment, right? So in
As an
Yeah.
amendment.
appropriate
Yeah,
proportions, then
Yeah.
it's
and that's why I'm happy to, I'm glad you asked for the breakdown of what's,
Yeah, so he was gonna send that to you, right? Alan?
Yes.
That would be
It was
great if you could help
call in and call in.
interpret that for us.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder about like the purity or decency of our compost going into the machine, like
Yeah.
what Louise sees, because
Yes.
speaking
What goes
from
in comes out.
experience, I had a plastic baby in our compost bin for my daughter. She's 2. She just like
Right.
one day was like, and I found it, and I was like,
yeah.
no. But you know, had I not,
Been digging
you know
for
what I
your
mean? There
neck.
could have been
Yeah.
like just a little baby.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, and it was
Yeah.
so.
That is,
And what happens to the
I mean, throughout,
plastic?
To the baby.
throughout Metro Vancouver, I mean, when you buy compost from Mike, you know, you'll see the
Yeah.
bits of plastic in it. And
Yeah.
it's getting less and less over the years. And, you know, we've been doing this in the region now for, what, 5 years, something like that? And so it's getting better. And I understand that Bowen is really better than the Metro Vancouver.
We're excellent.
Yeah,
We're
okay.
very-
So we don't really need to worry about.
We don't have a lot of plastic babies.
Right, or just like weird stuff, baby wipes, you never know, you
No,
know?
Well, for sure.
Until Laura showed up.
Oh, it's my fault.
Okay, I guess we should move on,
Keep it
so we don't get really behind our agenda, because we have a piece of hard work to do. Let's have a look at where we are. 6.4.1, delegations all done, action items. Okay, let's review our action items. We're on page 6 or 7, here you are, page 9. Number 1, book leave, done. Okay.
It's a fun list, actually.
Yeah. Book Greg Cormier.
Done.
Done?
Great.
Contact Hydro, find tree chopping, Bonnie.
I did, yes.
And I see they've actually cut some of those trees down now.
Well, the
Yeah.
municipality actually came
Okay,
and did
okay,
that, just because
good.
they were gonna go where they were
Yeah.
quite dead. But I
Yeah.
had a lovely conversation with
Good.
arborist, and, it's not their practice to talk. And they are gonna talk to the contractors and just ensure that they call it the hydro crescent, where if you look down the road, you see that nice crescent, and that's what they're after,
Right.
is just trimming back the
Right.
limbs and making that
A
corner.
nice
So,
present.
yeah, he was wonderful, wonderful, and,
Okay.
and he actually sent somebody out the next day to look, and it
Is he horrified?
I didn't follow up.
No, they were quite bad. It
Yeah,
was-
yeah,
good,
yeah,
they-
yes.
Okay, well, thanks a lot.
In that regard, I remember seeing the photograph. I didn't come to the meeting, but I did see the material that came out beforehand, and I thought, that's gotta be 10 years old already. So it had finally become maybe, caught somebody's attention, they felt the need to communicate it. But the crescent has certainly been the predominant end product lately of all their clearing.
Okay, next was Mark, and he did that. Thank you very much, and he brought back a nice sample for us.
Just to be clear for members of the
And
public,
then-
that was not funded by the municipality. That was,
Oh,
he was on his way on a holiday.
Right.
Right.
We all,
I had a counselor tell me the minutes
we owe him
were.
a beer.
Yeah, no. No
Thanks,
bills
Mark.
received.
It was the drone comment, I think.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Much appreciated. No, actually, it really is appreciated, like,
Yeah.
actually.
And you know what, it was
Absolutely.
such a good
It's amazing. It has
version.
almost
Yeah,
a,
there's like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, actually, I
It's
almost
just
smell
earthy.
chocolate too.
Yeah. It was like chocolate?
yeah.
And when it's being processed, that's the smell, it's very, and, like, it's not offensive and it's not strong.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
When I smell that, I said, I must be running a chocolate deficit right now.
No, I kind of thought the same thing. Number 5, we all read those things. There's a test at the end of today. Summary of the OCP.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maureen,
you,
that's
Maureen.
feelings. Conservation development, climate conservation, we've had that, and Maureen and I will talk about it a little bit. And then the soil biology, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah,
At the
I
moment.
haven't actually
Yes.
lined that up yet, so
No, that would
I
be
will
great.
do so.
We've got some time, so that was good. Okay, that item done, thank you very much. Where are we now? Updates, here we are, Maureen and I. Some of you were there at the presentation, but, so the idea, I think I might have explained it a little bit, but basically the idea is that instead of, the worry is if we continue to develop the way the rest of the lower mainland has developed, the sort of suburban spread really sort of creeped its way up the mountains on the North Shore and into the agricultural lands out in the Fraser Valley, and that if we don't change things, we could end up with the same sort of approach on Bowen Island. And so it was really a discussion about clustering development, just as really as John Reed has done in Grafton Lake development. So clustering development, so you save at least 50% or more. You would investigate what parts of the land, if you're looking at this, is if there's a rezoning on private land. And so that what they would do they would have a look at their land. They would have someone such as Alan go out and do an assessment. Where are the environmentally sensitive areas? Where are the areas that really should be protected? And then cluster development in a way that those areas are protected. That way you reduce fragmentation of the forest and you allow our island to maintain the large amount of forest cover and the sort of rural character that we have, rather than sort of spreading development all over the island. And this is particularly important now when land values have gone up so much, so there's an incentive for people to sell their land or develop their land. And we also know that we need some housing on the island for the people who can't afford to live here right now. So it's a, sort of a discussion around that is what we had that day. John Reed added some interesting information. He went to, and I haven't gone, and I want to go, because there's one more coming, a Fire Smart presentation. And one of the issues around that is how much space you need to leave around each home. So if you have homes that are spread all over the forest, you're going to have to cut trees around them so that they don't become burned down like homes in California and homes in the Okanagan. So if you're clustering your houses and you're having to build a non-treed space around them or a less treed space around them, it's way better than if you're doing it where they're spread all around the landscape. So that's sort of what the discussion was. And Maureen and I just discussed it a moment ago at the beginning of the meeting. So the idea is fairly easy to grasp, but the issue for a municipality is, okay, if we want to encourage something like this, how do you do it in terms of policy? Like, do you set up a new bylaw? Do you have a policy? Do you have some sort of an encouragement or incentive? What do you do? And so one of the things that we were just chatting about, and I know John Reed has talked about too, it would be interesting. I also sit on the APC, the Advisory Planning Commission. It would be interesting to put this before the APC to say, okay, here's an interesting idea for the commission to have a look at, to make recommendations to council on how they might implement such a thing. So that's perhaps something that we could recommend. I don't think we need, we're not making a recommendation to council. Well, we're asking John, we just need to go to the chair of the APC.
I think so.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Maureen?
I'm curious about how many have seen the video that illustrates the concept. Not
I
everybody.
haven't
No.
seen the video, but I've had discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really brief. I
Yeah.
wonder if we could maybe just play it to ground everybody, so
That'd be
that the URL is graftonlake.ca, and then /conservation dev, DEV. And I think it just really brings
Exactly. Great
it
idea.
across very, very clearly.
Yeah.
And there's lots of supplementary material on
Yes.
Grafton Lake site, but this is the core piece.
Yeah.
Can you pop it up a wee bit to see the top of the video? Just the scroll bar. Oh, there you go.
It's like a disease.
So I've sort of been watching this as it's being developed over the last couple of months, and this reference, the Errant Book on Conservation Design, it's one of the core publications that talks about this concept, but it's not a difficult concept to grasp.
No.
I mean, once you get the label, you
Mhm.
understand it. Yeah.
You can all Google conservation design or conservation development. I think there's one other I've seen, I forget. But you can sort of see the work that others have done around this. So, yeah, good idea for, that's how it looked, that was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, because when development starts creeping up there,
And it was amazing to see that video of 30 years. Right?
Yeah.
So 30 years, seems like a long time. Well, I think it was 30 years ago I bought our property on Bowen Island, and it's changed that much since then, which is kind of
Out
amazing.
in the home, we have the
Yeah.
photos, and we actually, I want to get the next one, we have the 2016 one, so, but we've got, I forget the first one, it's about a 7, 8, 10 years now, it's like, it's really dramatic.
Yeah.
And I just really want to get this, because I think there's nothing more visual than that, just to
Mhm.
see how our country's being lost,
Yeah.
mentioned.
One of the aspects that I find interesting is that what John is talking about in this particular case is like large properties.
Yes,
But
that's
the overall lower mainland wide aerial photography basically captures even the small properties that are also being chopped up.
Yeah.
So it's actually, even though it's more applicable at the planning level to big subdivisions, it applies as well to the little ones.
That's a good point, Alan. It came up in the workshop on our community lands as well. It came up in sort of in the discussion ahead of time, but in all the tables where everybody was working, they were doing clustering land, clustering development around pathways and things like that, so that as much forest was left as possible as natural spaces that we all like. Okay, the last item that we need, other than a few information items, is developing a work plan. But no, let's talk about CARET first. Bonnie, you want to?
No, and I was really behind the times, like I just.
Yeah, 'cause we did do it, right?
Yeah, and Emma actually has that report on the agenda
Yeah.
about the
Okay.
charging stations. So I just don't remember, I don't remember that going to council, but I guess it did.
I thought it did go to council, and I think I remember.
No, the recommendation.
Our
for us
recommendation,
To
yeah.
utilize the 4K towards,
I think it did. I think I
just
remember
don't
seeing it on the
remember.
council.
Okay, perfect.
I actually don't recall.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe
Oh, well,
I can follow up on
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
just to ensure that that's.
It's related to the charging stations? Because I think there is something on the agenda related to that, but I thought it was, yeah, to use, I guess, the 4,000
Yeah.
towards
The agenda item,
purchasing?
I was looking at it today, the agenda item has to do with authorizing the purchase of equipment.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to do with our
Yeah.
recommendation.
Yeah, I just don't remember seeing it, so I just want to make sure that, but it may have made it, the transition.
Yeah. We can check up on that. So let's talk about our work plan. What we were thinking of doing, we've only got half an hour left, but an interesting process would be, and I actually watched the affordable housing group.
Housing.
The housing, I'm sorry.
Affordable diverse
The diverse
housing.
housing,
Yeah.
the housing
Important.
committee, and elected chair who did an astonishing job, I felt, in developing a work plan. And here's how it went. And so we've got some items down here, you know, Mark's interested in the site alteration bylaw, and we've got these other things. Is that we just take some stickies, and everybody takes a few minutes to write down things that they think that we should be able to do in a year annual work plan. And then, so, and we happen to have stickies here.
Give me stickies.
And then what we'll do is we'll just put them up on the wall and start organizing them into clusters and see kind of what comes up. However, before we do that, there's one thing we should all do, and that's just have a look at the back of our document. Not the back, the very back. Is it on the very back? We should look at our terms of reference. Let's just remind ourselves who we are and what we're supposed to do.
Good idea.
that's a good one.
Yeah, right at the very back. Page 26 to 28. So some of it, let's just look at 9 or 10 things there. Some of them are from council, where council asks us to do stuff. So the committee will provide advice and recommendations to council on a wide range of existing and emerging environmental issues and trends, including strategic planning, bylaws, policy. That's something we can do ourselves, take initiative. 2, provide a local perspective, again, giving due consideration to this and that. Again, that's something we can initiate. The same with the next one, identify and advise on ways to build local environmental awareness. So that's interesting within the community. Then D is referred by council. Are you looking at it?
She's on a roll.
No, go, that's awesome.
Don't cheat.
She's read them.
Yeah.
So D is when things, council sends us stuff, we gotta have a look at it. E, continue to work on targets on the climate action revenue incentive program, what we were talking about a moment ago. Public education on environmental strategies, but again, as directed by the municipality. Encourage and support community-based initiatives related to climate, and anything else referred to by council. So there's a couple of things there, 3 or 4 things that council wants us to do, but there's a lot that we can do ourselves. So, fire away.
Okay.
The idea is one sticky per?
Yes, one sticky per idea, sure, yeah.
And what Robin did with Emma was we generated a ton of stickies, and then we put them up and did a bit of clustering, and people generated more stickies.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's good. That's good, thanks. We'll put them all up on here and then we'll start sorting them.
Or, are you doing like, you see one, give it a category, and then someone else that was one at a time?
I guess we could do it one at a time, that way that would be easier, wouldn't it?
Does that work? Yeah. I can have them to you if you want. You want to read them out?
Here, I'll give you mine,
Okay.
and I'll just go.
Encourage water storage for non-potable uses. Are you want to? Oh, you want to go? Okay. Oh, I thought you said.
Yeah,
Thank you for coming.
Oh, you can read it?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. I thought, I could.
Don't miss it.
It's so late.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
sorry, Sarah. Thank you.
You guys can make some.
You're leaving again? You did this.
I know, I'm sorry.
In due course, I will not be doing that.
Yeah.
You're right, sorry.
Update the green building rezoning policy to reflect BC step code. AIS-TERA. Okay, we're not the
Actions, yeah. Step code.
So we'll just call it step code?
Yeah.
Any more step codes?
No.
Biking
Well,
and
yeah.
composting.
What is it?
Here's the water too.
Okay.
Water.
Water.
Did you?
Okay, that's a boil for you.
Some water.
Step code. I mean, you can broaden this to buildings.
Transportation.
Oh, biking transportation?
Yeah.
Raise
Electric vehicles.
Electric vehicles.
said transportation, put it down here.
Yeah.
Can we have waste reduction or
Oh.
something?
Yeah, I have like
Something, I mean, it's
Okay.
sort of,
What is it?
oh, it's kind of like waste systems, waste systems.
Residuals management.
Residual.
Residual.
Biofuel.
Oh, I like that.
Biofuel, that's interesting. Let's call it waste, because
Yeah.
that's
Okay,
how
everybody
you.
understands.
Waste slash resource.
Resource,
Yeah.
yeah.
Resource.
That goes there,
Okay.
for birds, make, yes.
Okay, so I've got, this is coming,
Composting oh, look at that, composting toilet, biochar. Does
so
that
this is
explain?
coming from Kathy Robertson. She's talking about sustainability guidelines for buildings.
So it goes
So
into
that-
step
oh,
code.
that's that.
We'll turn this to buildings and step code. Water conservation.
Accountability. This is, make sure we're doing our parent reporting. That went by the by for a while.
I'll
Accountability.
put it over here.
Yeah, we don't want to lose that.
No.
Could there be one that's sort of policy and policy,
No.
environmental policy and, I know it's a bad word, policy, because we have site operation bylaw and shoreline development for the area.
Okay, so, protection bylaws or something of that sort?
Tools,
Environmental protection
mechanisms.
mechanisms.
And I've got keep the climate conversations going, which has to do with public education and awareness.
Okay.
Yeah, they-
Communication and awareness.
Okay, I was thinking of, I just crossed my mind now that I had this up, let's call it public ed. On
huge.
climate. It's huge, but I was sort of doing it for years and felt.
Okay,
Oh,
so I've got,
where I start.
support environmental stewardship, create a collective.
What's that?
I'd really like to look at supporting the environmental stewardship of creating a collective of people who work on that.
Okay, so I'm just wondering if it fits, well, okay, I mean,
That's community action. I mean,
Yeah,
that-
I know, it's
and
community action.
Community action.
Okay.
so it sort of fits with this public education on
Yeah.
climate, but it's maybe I'll put community.
What was that on climate? Okay.
That is, yeah, that's what I see it. Community action, awareness and action. I'll put it in there.
And this one maybe is probably also education too, but it's,
Strategy, plastic reduction, yes.
it's,
That's good.
So we'll fit in the same category?
yeah. And then I have, I don't know where this goes, but just take a look at that, see what you.
Create process, assess environmental issues, okay. I mean, that's an
On
interesting one.
specific
mechanisms? Protection mechanisms?
Or, yeah, it could be environmental protection mechanisms. Are you thinking that, or are you thinking higher level?
I think a little bit more.
Assess environmental issues, so a
Yeah,
process that
it's kind of-
Is
assesses.
it data collect, are you?
Well, we
looking
have
at
the
data
stressed
collection?
areas on the island,
Yeah,
and if we are wanting to maybe begin an assessment of that and how, what can we do in that, what we have to do.
And you know, it's one of the ones I didn't write down, which was your original, that you had brought up, the whole inventory and GIS and all of
Yeah,
that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that the housing committee went for right away, that we don't know enough
Yes,
about what we're doing.
exactly.
So that's what,
Yeah.
So just the
Doing
assessment,
Assessment,
assessing it,
Yeah.
what's going on.
and maybe prioritization of
yeah.
So that, yeah, so this goes into the same idea, it's looking at the distressed areas. Just give it to-
So I've got assess and prioritize issues, or,
Yeah, okay, so that's the,
okay.
and here's the same idea, but probably the same category.
Open issues about land care in distressed areas, so I think
Yeah,
Same
same
category.
idea. I don't know if this is composting.
pursue composting ideas apply, we had waste.
yeah. And I've got a slightly weird,
Okay,
but really essential, support other committees' work, APC, VINCAP, Parks, Trails, and Greenways.
I love
So
the
it's like,
concepts.
like getting out of silos.
Everything
Yeah.
So we're not gonna do this, we're gonna do it on
Yeah.
our own,
Yeah.
whatever this is.
I mean, for instance, transportation, there's a whole bunch of people working on this, but this,
Exactly, it's,
Right.
it's in,
so it's
I'm looking at this one there.
inventory and GIS.
it's kind of a, how we do our work.
It's sort of
Process.
unsiloing.
Unsiloed.
Okay, I'm just gonna, since we've got some room, I'll go right here, so it's, Okay,
Collaboration. Go for collaboration.
Because like, one of the things on climate change, so many years ago, when I was working on climate change, I went to a presentation by the minister, federal minister, Sergio Marque, and then I got an argument from afterwards saying, you're not doing anything, and he said, don't blame me. It's not really an environmental issue, it's everybody's issue, and nobody's doing it.
Yeah.
Nobody is doing it everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I think,
Yes.
it's all connected.
So what do you have to write up on that?
Support other committees' work, e.g. APC, MTAC, Parks and Trails. Where'd you go, Mark? Okay, who
I was
else?
just thinking about volunteers, I know that was really.
Volunteers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Community
Yeah,
outreach.
that's great.
It's in this community awareness and action.
That's pretty good.
Wow, look at that.
We're gonna be tired.
What was that?
Yeah.
The minutes should have stepped back for a minute. So we got water, and are they all the same? Water conservation, rainwater harvesting, encourage water cisterns, encourage water storage. Yeah, okay. Water conservation, planning, data collection.
So, but what's missing? Like, one of the things that's missing here is that we have all of those separate water systems.
Yeah.
The municipal water systems.
That's right.
The independent owners, and there is this overarching issue of water.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I have another one too,
Okay,
yeah.
write it down.
Relates to water
Because
as well.
because the issue is not just, I mean, it's water, all the water we take for our toilets and gardens.
Yeah.
Well, the garden's probably okay, but it's taking it away from the water table, which is taking it away from the forest.
Water school, water management,
Yeah.
there's something like that.
Yeah.
To do with the big picture.
Yeah.
Bob Turner.
I will, but I also will stick around.
Oh, yeah,
Somewhere.
Bob's for
That,
waterscape.
There's
Yeah.
more stuff that can be done on that.
Yeah. So let's look at buildings, update new building. So,
Sorry, I'm so sorry, I just wanted to just.
Water conservation planning.
We have one test well, if people didn't know, we
Oh,
have
yeah.
a provincial test well.
That's right.
In the aquifer,
Yeah.
Shelby, we just saw it this year.
Okay.
So we're collecting real-time data, just telemetry, we can get real-time data.
Where is it going?
It's up at Channelview, it's just by Dallas Drive.
Right.
But ideally, it'd be really nice to have one of those in each of our 7 aquifers,
Yeah.
just to get more information.
We have
because
7 aquifers?
Yeah, that's what, the best guess, I don't know, best
I had no idea.
estimate, I guess. So that's, yeah, and it's, the criteria for the provincial wells is, we have to find something that's not being used. So it may mean in the future we'll be drilling one in a particular aquifer we can't find, because we had a hard
Can
time.
you just write a little bit more about this, please?
Sure.
So maybe that's something you could include in the development.
Yeah.
And ask for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
that's
second
good.
well for that purpose.
Because we need to know what's going on, like we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there-
As
there
Bonnie says,
are-
there are some of the wells
Yeah.
around, we're trying
Exactly.
to use it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's like you said, the conservation development, like, it's all about the water, right? It's the limiting factor.
Yeah.
That's right.
Or one of the limiting factors. Okay, so that's, water's
Water's good.
super interesting.
Yeah.
What we'll do at the end of this, we'll capture all this, and then we'll have to talk about it a whole lot more and see, okay, circulate the document and sort of say, okay, what do we do with all this?
Bonnie's still writing.
Yeah.
She's still going.
Because she gets to leave. She just
Yeah.
gets like, okay,
You're
do
welcome.
this, I'm leaving.
Okay, let's look at buildings and step code. Okay, the green building rezoning policy to reflect BC. So where are we in the step code? What did we agree to do?
We didn't,
We didn't?
we have not made
Is everybody aware of the step code?
Yes.
No? Yeah,
So-
okay.
a, council has not made a commitment to a specific level. What's happening is that, there is report coming from planning about, community awareness of what it actually means. The communications team has been asked to develop some supporting educational information that only came to the team this morning. In terms of larger context, all the North Shore municipalities agreed to level 3.
Free and we're not doing anything yet.
We're not doing anything yet, we're not unusual in not doing anything yet.
Okay.
So most municipalities have embarked on either a commitment to a specific level or to community engagement, find out.
The idea is
what makes
get
sense.
everybody to understand this issue
Yeah.
before we drop it on everybody and
Yes,
say, hey,
exactly.
let's do it.
So council is actually kind of ahead of the curve on this one,
Okay.
in that we've had a number of presentations being presented to council to, a mixed response, but there's also been for the last 2 years, major presentations at some of the conferences that
Yeah,
we've attended,
right.
just informing us about what this means. So the notion is that we want to incrementally bring Bowen on board with the step code rather than us having to face a great big jump when it becomes law.
So, and that's what I was gonna say, it is something that is gonna become law,
Yeah.
like it's something coming
In
at us.
time,
Yeah.
it will, yeah. And I can't remember,
I
but
can't
it's
either.
2030?
Yeah.
Is it?
It's not stupidly far away.
No, I thought it was sooner than that.
I think it's in the 20s.
It's gonna be, the time is gonna get faster.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's something that
Yeah.
you don't want to have land without being prepared.
Yeah. So let's have a look at step code, contractor workshops, right, education, figure out how to support the energy step code, building step code, and environmental transparency with the building process, consider a sustainability guideline for building. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the really cool thing is that our new building inspector knows this very well.
And next meeting, he'll be here.
Okay.
Oh, really?
He's right on it, and he's
Yeah, I can't wait to.
involved
Yeah.
for many years. He
Okay.
has a sunny house, almost.
So we have an in-house resource.
What's his name?
Great coordinator.
Oh, of course.
So he'll be at the next meeting.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, transportation, support Bowen, the commuting Bowen community, encourage bike ridership as a multi-use path. It's built in stages, trails, walking, making Bowen more foot-friendly, stairs, encourage electric vehicle and infrastructure. And then we've got the advocate for an electric ferry, which is within transportation, but quite different from these ones. Yeah, that's great. The new transportation plan, which we all read for our.
And it was good.
Good, yeah.
And I'm not being facetious, I really did.
It gets into all that stuff. It's trying to be, and I heard that, well, Melanie told me that she met with the minister, and the minister thought it was really great, and felt that it should be a model for other islands.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So all council was part of that, and
Okay.
it was really nice, the feedback that Claire Terena gave was very positive.
Good. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And, this is a tricky one, because the school talks about getting the kids going, and, so when they're doing that bike to school, and you're driving across the road, there's families taking up the whole road going at a mile an hour.
It is so
Terrifying.
stressful.
I know. Yeah.
I'm like, just
Yeah.
get on the bus. It's like they just fly down the hills.
But until we have,
Helmets are so
I read the, in my homework in the last little while, I read the island survey, the 2018.
Yeah.
There are 65, something like that, comments saying it's not safe to walk or cycle on our roads.
Yeah.
It's
It's
true.
not.
It is. It is. No, I know. I used to commute by bike when I worked in various places in the city. I always felt that my ride off the ferry going up the hills was the most dangerous.
Wow.
It is.
That's,
Yeah. Okay, wait. Research determine feasibility of biofuel. So this biofuel is really interesting. So they got into all kinds of technical stuff in the talking about it. But so at Richmond, so in fiber now called Harvest Power. So they have two systems, and one of them is basically a closed system, and that makes methane. And so instead of landfills generating methane, which causes global warming, they're capturing it all, turning it into natural gas and running it into the system. So that's what we could do, but that's a big system, and it's too hard and too complicated.
And I don't think Bowen would generate enough.
It wouldn't make it, and we don't have anything to do with it because we don't have any natural gas pipelines and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that kind of doesn't work. But then you can burn things to generate electricity by burning things, steam, electricity. Again, we're not big enough. It would be, they would do it in Europe, but using that other stuff to burn, certainly you could do it. And I love the idea. I love the idea of compost, but we want to find out how good it is. I love the idea of using it in a new community field, facility or fire hall or whatever.
I don't know how that would fit, but
Yeah.
it just is, it's kind of a.
It's just a boiler, like you have a
Yeah.
boiler in it.
Burn boiler, Yeah,
And
right.
there is the air quality byproduct
Yeah.
to consider.
And the people in Calgary, just a quick sideline, so he was all about being carbon negative and getting tax credits. So
Yeah.
what he did with his emissions, he sprays water into it and it combines with the carbon and creates an acid
Mhm.
that he then uses in his laundromat.
Oh, is that right?
Sorry, but, yeah, I know, but when he said it's this little thing and this makes everything not, it's not even neutral. I'm sucking carbon out of
That's
it.
incredible what, you know, what you can do if you really put time into
Right?
it.
Exactly.
And this guy is not an environmentalist, I just want to make money.
Turn it around right there.
Yeah. So composting of pilots, sport birds, take more items, plastic, styrofoam for property. Okay, we can talk about that a little bit, composting toilets now, on biochar and gray water systems. All right, tell us all about biochar.
Well, biochar is
I read about it, I don't fully grasp it.
It is basically turning organic matter
Yeah.
into charcoal.
Yeah,
Okay? And so
burning it without oxygen.
that's right. So it's basically cooking it to
Yeah.
partially
Yeah.
burn. So yeah, it gets turned into charcoal. The charcoal is then sequestered. That represents sequestered charcoal because this is not used as a fuel, it's used as a soil land.
Right.
And because of the nature of charcoal, it has all these basically old cell walls and stuff still in the
Yeah.
structure
Yeah.
that serves as, some literature says, basically apartment buildings for soil microbiota.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you end up with a
Yeah.
super healthy soil
So
community.
it helps
It's like-
remediate soil, is what you
Yes, exactly. It's not a fertilizer in itself, it is a soil amendment that together with additional organic matter and live inputs like fungi.
It also absorbs carbon dioxide,
It doesn't necessarily absorb carbon dioxide, no, but it retains water, improves friability. So
yeah, so how
there's a broad spectrum from minimalist to, big plants.
one scale, possible?
Oh, yeah, I've made stuff as small as in a little paint bucket in my wood stove to in a big barrel, so that's the extent of my personal experience.
So that's a climate conversation,
Mhm.
how to make your own biochar.
Well, that's the thing, you can just do it at home.
I give a little talk to the grade fives at the school and run a little fake wood stove. And
The grown-ups need it too.
I got the answer.
It's your organic matter.
Yes, so it's really, well, you can use food, I even did like some leftover slightly moldy rice, I put it in there. But usually it's lumber ends from a construction site for land clearing debris, as long as it's dried well beforehand.
Yes.
It takes a lot more energy, of course, to cook it if you've got to dry the water out first. There's a lot of literature on it. There's the International Biochar Initiative.
Yeah.
Europe is, of course, big farther ahead of us. But there is a Canadian biochar organization, big US one. And when the time comes, I can compile them.
All right, so when the time comes, so we'll have to look more into this. We'll talk more about it. It's really interesting to know if you turn it into something
Oh,
on
and in the climate conversation side of things,
kind of,
yeah, it's really a sequestering carbon.
right.
It
Yeah.
kind of captures it
Yeah.
and it remains in,
Right.
It's not so much for capturing, it's not letting it be released.
It's not, so if you
But
then
it
plant
turns
a
it into a
tree,
form that doesn't get released.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean, yeah.
and you then plant a new tree, you're now carbon negative.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a system.
Yeah.
Speaking back to the composting
Mhm.
toilets, when I was organizing the Bowen Housing Series, we had a sort of bucket of things that people were suggesting about housing that seemed to be problematic. And we were trying to find, like, can you put together like a tough things kind of
Yeah.
a workshop, and that's one of them. And we did some research, Sue Ellen and Alison Morse and I, and the composting toilets thing, that's something that Greg Cormier should speak to when he comes and talks to us about the step code.
Right.
Because we were under the assumption, and I think I've got this right, but I'm not sure. We were under the assumption that this was all in the realm of the province and Vancouver Coastal Health, but the feedback we got was no, it's actually a matter of the building inspector. And I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, because
So
I thought the
we
same
need
thing.
to follow up on it.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
under the same impression.
So was I.
Yeah, under the Health Act.
Me too.
Yeah, but there might be something in the building code that's.
And
Okay.
I don't know the details, but
So-
we should run that by Greg.
So a bunch of these
Can you
things
talk
require
about this?
investigation.
And
Yeah.
some on the gray water,
Yeah.
the batch of gray water as well, that one
Yes,
too is in
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Right,
That was, I thought that was a, I thought that was a provincial
I thought that
thing
too.
as well.
That still is my
Yeah.
understanding, but it would be good to get his perspective on
Right.
composting, gray water systems.
Yes, definitely, because it comes up everywhere.
Yes.
And incidentally, you know Jason Henderson
Yeah,
of Henry Creek.
yeah.
He apparently has recently had permitted for the island a gray water / composting toilet system. So he's, I don't know, and I want to find out, he mentioned it in some sort of social setting, but I couldn't sort of get the entire information. So at some point, it might be worth finding out and/or inviting him to give us a bit of a brief
Yeah.
presentation.
Yeah.
Pioneering, because that's bursting through that regulatory barrier.
Yeah.
And it makes so much sense, right?
Plastics. So I could talk for a long time about plastics, that I'm working on for a long time. Plastics is a really tricky one. There'll be a nice announcement tomorrow in Halifax on this. Because plastics is quite a remarkable substance. Like if you want to say, let's get rid of plastic bags and use paper bags, well, many analyses show actually that more energy goes into paper bags than plastic bags. Now, you don't want plastic bags flying off and going into the ocean, so turtles eat them and die and stuff like that. But, you know, and plastic is actually, in terms of food waste, plastic is very valuable to avoid food waste. In terms of GHG emissions from trucking things, glass is heavy, plastic is light. So Coke bottles are heavy, Coke plastic bottles or whatever are much lighter. So there's all kinds of advantages of plastic. So just sort of ditching plastic and say, hey, we shouldn't do plastic anymore, is not the right solution in many circumstances. The only correct solution is making plastic so that it's fully recyclable instead of not being recyclable. And making plastics that are made of plants, waste plants, rather than petroleum products. And making plastics that dissolve into nature rather than turning into toxins. So those are all things that are part of the industrial process, the sort of circular economy that's needed, rather than the let's not allow this anymore. Now the problem with right now is we're in a real mess because China will take a lot of plastics. We don't have the kind of plastics that we need. We have all kinds of plastics that are in layers. You can't recycle them really easily, or it will take more effort to recycle them and make new ones. And so plastics is a really difficult problem right now. And Bird is in trouble. Well, they seem to take everything. I don't know where it goes. I mean, it seems quite remarkable what they take.
But then they don't take some plastics.
Yeah.
They have like a zipper,
Oh, that's right.
you know,
Ziploc bags, yeah.
So if you can go to London Drugs right now, and they're taking a lot of the stuff like
Yeah.
saran wrap,
Yeah.
Ziploc bags, stuff that Bird doesn't take, and there's some stuff that they don't take still.
But then we have to know what happens to it, because it might just get taken to the incinerator and get burned. I don't know. I don't know.
In that regard, there's a family on Bowen who are zero waste.
I've been to work on
Have you-
it. It's
Harmony
amazing.
and Aaron?
This is Jean
Okay.
Biochar.
Well,
So
there's more than
two
that.
families.
Yeah, right, but there's another, and these people, they were that way before they moved to Bowen, so since they've been on Bowen,
Amazing.
they don't use the garbage service.
It's amazing.
Wow.
How did they move to Bowen?
No, I think there's a
Boxes
fair
are
amount of
untaped.
fuel spent taking it.
Yeah.
But still,
Be good to have a zero waste there.
again, sort of, either a guest presentation to us here or a conversation at the large public. They just have a baby.
Maybe Janine would be, and it would be so nice to go to her house because it's amazing. She's
This would
really
be
proud.
good on the
You're
sort of
talking Janine or Jeanette?
communication to the
Yeah.
public
Oh,
around that kind of thing.
She's,
Zero waste stuff, right?
she's lush.
Zero waste tour.
Zero waste tour.
It's amazing.
yeah, it's like really hard to find.
People's plants and.
I came back to my house and I just felt so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel
I know.
In terms of garbage, I need to check my data, but I think, yes, like the worst industry in the world in terms of emissions and so on, generally considered the oil industry. You know what's next? Clothing.
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
Textiles. Fast fashion is just a dreadful.
So
Yeah.
one of the things that Veteran was looking at
Yeah.
is textile recycling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of textiles can be recycled because they're a blend, like a spandex.
So this is another thing I worked on. So I organized a session of this at the Zero Waste Conference last year. So I talked to all these people who are making, recycled cottons and so on, and recycled jeans and all those kinds of things. And it's really tricky. It's really tricky. It's the usual sort of thing when you can recycle it for a while, but then the fibers get shorter and shorter, and it becomes kind of not so good anymore. Stuff like that.
It's also related to water,
Yes.
because the amount of water used for production.
Cotton,
is
that's
so
great.
high.
Water awful for cotton. So blue jeans, which we think are nice and whatever, hippie,
Don't.
they're very, very bad garments.
But they are compostable.
Sorry.
Okay.
Going away from the plastics.
Yeah.
One thing that perhaps we could promote is the filters that you can put into
That's a good
your
idea.
washing machine.
That's a good
Have
And
you
also
seen
we
them?
have, I haven't seen them,
Okay.
but they exist. And also too, they were talking about industrial size, like for wastewater
Yeah.
plants and such. So, but I think that that's something along with
That is a good idea.
harvesting is the filters for
Yeah.
washing.
The last time I heard Patagonia up in Squamish,
Yeah.
we're gonna start carrying it.
They
was that
carry
right?
these like balls that you put in the washer and
Yes.
it will collect the
Collect
bigger
stuff.
fibers.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
like they sell those, but they still make fleece jackets with shed atoms.
And the little sheds from that are.
Yeah, like I'm a little
And then-
confused on like what's.
But then these jackets came from pop bottles, so I mean.
Yeah, I know, if you.
It's great, isn't it?
I know, it's all gray, and
It's-
hard to figure out.
Like you.
But as Alan said, if you have a septic field, like I do,
Yeah.
then it doesn't really matter. If it's going into the sewage
Right.
system, it does matter. So for people in Stone Cove and so on, it matters.
The other thing too from the session I went to, was a federal session, and I was astounded with tires, how tires lose about 5 pounds per tire from
Yeah.
beginning of life to end
Yeah.
of life.
You just lose the rubber?
Yeah.
And
Just
then
comes
that
off.
goes into the ditches.
Yeah.
And so that's why
That's right.
bioswales and such
Yeah.
are so important, like especially in fish farming, which materials do,
Mhm.
because that's why they think that that might be contributing to some of the mortalities of fish. Just from 5 pounds a tire
Yeah.
of rubber
Yeah,
disappears.
when tires wear out, like, where does it go?
Yeah. Yeah, your tread starts out like that, and
And
then
then it's like that. What happens?
There's nanoplastics, there's nano rubber.
Yeah. Which isn't really rubber anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move down to, CAREC reporting, separate thing by itself, but this is all the whole climate change reporting structure.
You said accountability for that. Is there anything else under accountability that can be less specific?
Well, the CAREC report really kind of consolidates all of the initiatives at the community and corporate level. So, no, I think it's like a boilerplate thing.
It's a small bucket.
Yeah, and if you haven't looked at them,
Yeah.
you should, they're on the Climate Action Program
Yeah.
page
Yeah.
on the municipal website. And we have to do them every year, but there were a couple of years there where the municipality didn't file them.
Yeah.
And we're actually obligated to file under the Climate Action Charter.
Yeah.
So the provincial government didn't slap our wrists or anything, but we just didn't do it.
Yeah.
We didn't take stock.
Community awareness, really interesting. So the Zero Waste Tour, Environmental Stewardship Collective, and plastic reduction ideas with the zero waste. Making use of green infrastructure, yeah, that's interesting. Again, something the municipality can do, but of course so can people at their homes.
I'm sorry, David, going
Yeah.
back to the CAREC too.
Okay.
It'd be nice to sometime get to that, measuring our emissions, but we're not there yet,
Yeah.
but that would be a goal for
Yeah.
us as
Yeah.
leaders.
Yeah.
The OCP said 2012, right?
Pardon?
The OCP was just, EMF 2012.
I was trying to think it would be done by 2012.
Corporately zero,
Yeah.
zero emissions.
None of those targets were met. But what's interesting when you actually look at the emissions, we've actually done not badly. In the interim, we have brought things down. The province has started factoring in, as of last year, they factored in deforestation in the calculations about greenhouse gas emissions, and that hadn't been there before. And we took a pretty significant jump because it coincided with some major developments on the island. So it's well worth taking a look at that webpage that we have, and also just going to the province and looking at the community energy emissions inventories. And you can see how all the different communities in the province have made progress or not made progress.
Community energy, what? I'll send you the link.
Community energy
Yeah, that
emissions.
Is that the C?
That's the C, yeah. The C. So the
No,
public
that's the
awareness
plan.
stuff,
It's not the inventory.
Okay.
ecosystems, increase awareness of the interconnectedness of ecosystems, struggle with house now, encouraging awareness of involvement with the public on invasive species control.
Oh, Bonnie's writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Just finding a link.
environmental protection mechanisms, shoreline development
I think I've got it.
area, site alteration bylaw, site alteration, come up with a plan to discourage clearing of land before, such as fire hall. And move assessment on environment for projects, e.g. species risk, okay, more assessment, move assessment, more assessment. And then priority issues, create a process for assessing environmental issues, inventory and GIS, open issues around land care and distressed areas. So, an interesting array of things. So, Steph, I saw you writing big things on big things, are you just going to put these stickies onto them?
Yeah.
Very clever. Very
Put them on my desk
Yeah.
and do it in the morning.
That's sticky technology. All right.
That will take a picture as well.
Okay,
And then
so-
I'll just send you guys the notes and
Thank you.
it's great stuff. That's awesome.
Do you think they should think about that, or that's their?
That's a good idea. Let's just pass. So then we have to figure out what to do with this information.
Right.
And, some of it will need to get more data, but there's a nice little implementation plan, little sort of worksheet here, so you can sort of have a look at it, sort of an array of steps that we can take. Here, Mark. So if we can all, on the agenda of the next meeting is figuring out how we take steps to move forward on these, which are we would put priorities, which ones are within our scope to be able to do fairly quickly, which ones we need to do a whole lot more information, which one, and so on. We need to figure out what goes first, what goes second, what we have to throw over the side of the bus for now, and so on.
littering.
Okay, we won't do that.
The other point that came up in the housing committee meeting
Yeah.
was money.
Yeah.
Whether in order to accomplish some of these things, we actually needed some support.
Right.
You're shuddering. Yeah.
It's an uncomfortable conversation I'm having right now.
Pardon?
Maybe.
So it's because I'm not here, so because sometimes in the past I have taken initiatives and then put it into the environmental wish list for budget items. I mean, it's a good time of year because we're entering into the budget cycle, but I'm not here to do that, so I don't know where that would
We can talk
go.
about that next
Okay.
time.
Okay.
All right.
But I just want to flag that
Yeah.
some of these will have cost implications,
Yeah.
and that has to be part of our thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like even simple things like engaging the community. Okay, so staff time, buying
Rural
material or whatever, all these things cost staff time, which is really an important thing as well.
Great.
Let's just look at our agenda, see what, I think we had some information items. That's all the letter, the minutes of council, the bike barn, all that stuff, pretty straightforward. That's workshop, right, and our terms of reference. So the next meeting, October 3rd. So Steph is going to type all this up and send it to us.
Thank you,
Thank you
Steph.
very much,
Welcome,
Steph.
Steph.
We really appreciate that. And then we'll have a look at how clever we were.
And feel good for a moment.
It's all in the back.
Okay, so any other items for our agenda? It's about 9:15. Okay.
Just very,
What
I
happened
sent
to
an
Will?
email out.
Yeah, what happened to Will? Will didn't show up. Will's
Yeah,
always
you
here.
didn't make it.
Yeah.
I sent out that email about this
Oh, yeah,
webinar
the
that's
webinar.
coming up. Anybody who's interested, let me know. As I say, I've got this small apartment where, 2 or 3 of us could get together, but if there was gonna be any more, we would have to find a larger venue.
Right.
But it's an interesting one about water
Yeah,
and,
it did look good,
yeah.
and it might fit with what we're trying to do right here.
It was October
was it
4th.
something, was it no charge, or do we?
It was all free.
It was all free?
Yeah, and basically I registered because it said spaces are limited, so,
Oh, okay.
but with one registration, a whole bunch of people can
Yeah,
watch.
right, yeah, okay, okay, thanks. Anything else? All right, motion to adjourn? Any objections to that? I think we're adjourned, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good meeting, thanks.
That was a good meeting.
Yeah.
It was.